Beneath the polished pages of history lies a second war, a war of vanished files, sealed vaults, and whispers too dangerous to name. In the shadows of bombed cities and cold mountain passes, men carried secrets heavier than steel. The victors buried them, the defeated denied them, and somewhere between, the truth was locked away, waiting for the one who dares to dig it up. On April 19, 1945, with the Soviet 43rd Army pressing deeper into East Prussia, elements of the 3rd Guards Rifle Division were ordered to secure the smoldering ruins of Königsberg Castle. The city had been under siege for weeks, and its once formidable fortress was now a hollow shell of scorched stone and collapsed battlements. Amid the debris, a 6-man reconnaissance detail led by Senior Lieutenant Mikhail Yeligin uncovered a partially collapsed stairwell leading to a sub-basement not listed on any pre-war architectural plans. The chamber they entered was lined with wooden crates stenciled in faded Gothic script. Many bore the insignia of the Ahnenerbe, the SS Research Division. Others carried only a single phrase in red, Project Morgenrot. The men worked by flashlight, their boots echoing on the cold flagstones. Inside the crates were tightly bound bundles of rolled maps, reels of 35mm film, metallic cylinders sealed with wax, and several large blueprint cases. Yeligin's field report, dated April 21st, described complex schematics for machinery of unfamiliar configuration, annotated in both German and an unrecognized language. Orders arrived within hours. The entire find was to be crated for immediate rail transport to Moscow. The vault was resealed, and armed guards were posted above ground. According to Soviet archival transfer forms now partially declassified, the shipment was registered under Ministry of State Security File 7 to 9621, later renamed Red Obelisk. The surviving paperwork indicates the cargo reached the Lubyanka building in Moscow on May 2, 1945. After that date, the official trail ends. Western intelligence caught fragments of related communications. A decrypted British SIGINT intercept from May 1945 noted transfer of anomalous technical dossiers from Königsberg to secure facility, possible weapons research. American OSS records show an interest in captured German documents of non-standard physics, though these references abruptly ceased after mid-June. It is suspected that a joint US-UK intelligence probe into Morgenrot was shut down following diplomatic protests from the Soviet Foreign Commissariat. What little is known about the contents comes from a single surviving witness, Corporal Anatoly Lobanov, one of Yeligin's men. In a 1988 interview with a Russian journalist, Lobanov recalled unrolling one of the blueprints during the initial discovery. He described intricate geometric arrays surrounding what appeared to be a cylindrical core about the height of a man, with notations about field strength and oscillation. When asked if the designs resembled any known German weapon, Lobanov shook his head and said the measurements were not in metric or imperial, something else entirely. He also spoke of a metal case, smaller than a suitcase, that Yeligin ordered sealed without inspection. Lobanov claimed the case was unnaturally heavy for its size, and that the lieutenant seemed visibly unsettled after briefly handling it. According to Lobanov, Yeligin's later assignment to a classified post in the Urals came without explanation, and he was never seen again by his former comrades. During the height of the Cold War, the Red Obelisk file was expanded by Soviet counterintelligence, though not for public record. An internal 1958 KGB memorandum, obtained by Polish dissidents in the 1990s, references long-term analysis of Königsberg materials in association with Department 8. Department 8 was known for its work on advanced communications interception and experimental energy systems. The same memo mentions the term Nicht ursprünglich Deutsch, not originally German, suggesting that some elements of the cache predated Nazi acquisition. Researchers who have attempted to trace the Königsberg find face multiple obstacles. Soviet military engineering archives from the immediate post-war period remain sealed. Several key registries were destroyed in the 1991 Moscow fire that consumed part of the Ministry of Defense building, and no complete photographic record of the vault's contents has surfaced. In 2004, a small set of high-resolution stills, allegedly scanned from NKVD negatives, surfaced briefly on an encrypted European forum before being removed. The images, described by those who viewed them, showed detailed maps of Arctic archipelagos marked with geometric grid overlays, and a close-up of a cylindrical object with concentric ring assemblies. None of the images bore identifiable Nazi markings. Königsberg Castle itself was demolished by Soviet authorities in the late 1960s, erasing any chance of a modern archaeological survey. However, ground-penetrating radar scans conducted covertly in 2013 by a Polish-Lithuanian research group revealed subterranean anomalies beneath the site's reconstructed museum complex, patterns consistent with collapsed corridors and sealed chambers. The city authorities denied permission for excavation, citing structural concerns. Lobanov died in 1991 under unclear circumstances. His personal papers, kept in a small apartment in Kaliningrad, were removed by unidentified men 2 days after his funeral, according to neighbors. Among the missing items were his wartime diary and a small metal tube he had once claimed contained a scrap from the castle floor. To this day, Project Morgenrot remains absent from official German military records. No reference has been found in surviving SS documentation, nor in captured Wehrmacht archives held in Washington and London. Scholars remain divided. Some argue it was an abandoned Nazi weapons program of unconventional design. Others believe it was merely a cover for looted Soviet research repatriated to Moscow. A minority suggests the Soviets' insistence on total secrecy, and the term, not originally German, points to something more enigmatic. What is certain is that the vault beneath Königsberg Castle existed, that its contents were real, and that they vanished into the machinery of post-war intelligence without trace. Whether those crates still sit, undisturbed, in a forgotten storeroom of some Moscow archive, or whether their contents were dismantled and repurposed during the fevered decades of Cold War research, is a question that no surviving record has yet been allowed to answer. In the spring of 1947, 2 years after the collapse of the Third Reich, the U.S. Army's European Command received an unusual intelligence lead from an Austrian informant, a former Luftwaffe mechanic named Dieter Falk. Falk claimed that in April 1945, during the chaos of the German retreat, he had been ordered to prepare a modified Messerschmitt Me-262 jet for a one-way flight to an unmarked base somewhere deep in the Carpathian Mountains. According to him, the pilot never returned, and the jet was rumored to have been hidden in a sealed mine shaft. On July 12, 1947, a combined team from the U.S. Counterintelligence Corps, CIC, and the 332nd Engineer Aviation Company traced Falk's directions to an abandoned salt mine near Salzburg. Inside, buried under layers of tarpaulin and straw, they found the aircraft. Its fuselage bore no Luftwaffe insignia, only the designation V7 painted in black on the tail. Inside the cockpit, Captain Robert L. Garner of the CIC discovered a flight log wrapped in oilskin, its last entries written in a hurried, almost illegible hand. The coordinates referenced in the final entry placed the destination somewhere in the remote Maramureș region of northern Romania. The discovery triggered Operation Winter Flare, a classified reconnaissance mission under the direct authority of General Lucius D. Clay, then military governor of the U.S. zone in Germany. Between August and October 1947, 3 aerial survey flights were conducted over the coordinates, using F-5 reconnaissance variants of the P-38 Lightning. Each flight reported serious technical malfunctions, unexplainable compass deviations, repeated camera jams, and in one case, engine power loss without mechanical fault. The malfunctioning cameras returned only a handful of usable frames, showing forested ridges and, in one blurred image, a structure resembling an antenna mast. In November 1947, a 4th flight was dispatched with armed escort from the 86th Fighter Wing. Approximately 40 minutes into the overflight, radio contact was lost. The escort pilots reported sighting unknown aerial craft, twin fuselage, no visible markings, approaching from the east. The unidentified aircraft reportedly performed high-speed maneuvers inconsistent with any known Soviet or Western design. When the reconnaissance plane returned to Munich-Riem Air Base, every exposed roll of film had been fogged as if subjected to intense radiation. On December 3, 1947, a 5-man ground reconnaissance unit from the 11th Armored Cavalry Regiment attempted to approach the site on foot via the Ukrainian border. Declassified personnel rosters identify the leader as First Lieutenant Thomas R. Harker. The team made it to within 8 kilometers of the target coordinates before encountering what Harker described in his final field radio report as armed personnel in unmarked dark gray uniforms, speaking an unidentified language. Within minutes, contact was lost. The team returned to U.S. lines 36 hours later without injuries but refused to give detailed statements. All were reassigned within a week, their service records marked restricted. The entire winter flare file was classified top secret, magic, an unusually high compartment level typically reserved for nuclear-related intelligence. In 1965, during a routine declassification review, the file was pulled from the archives and transferred to the newly formed Defense Intelligence Agency. Only the original flight log from the Salzburg jet remains accessible, its final coordinates heavily redacted. Romanian military records from the late 1940s offer no trace of any foreign airbase in the Maramureș region, but a 1951 Soviet Ministry of Defense logistics report, leaked in the early 1990s, makes indirect reference to secured perimeter operations in the same area. The report notes the deployment of radar jamming equipment and heavy anti-aircraft batteries in support of Scientific Station M. In 1978, retired USAF Major Robert Garner, the same officer who recovered the Salzburg flight log, gave an anonymous interview to a researcher from the Cold War Studies Institute. He claimed that during the initial cockpit search, he had found not only the logbook but also a small metallic object in a padded pouch beneath the pilot's seat. It was roughly spherical, with precise hexagonal facets, and emitted a faint vibration when held. Garner said he handed it over to a CIC intelligence officer on site and never saw it again. His statement was never officially recorded. Satellite imagery from 1982, declassified by the U.S. Geological Survey in 2006, shows a narrow clearing at the target coordinates with several linear shadows consistent with antenna arrays. However, in imagery from 1984 onward, the site appears overgrown, with no visible structures. Local oral histories collected in the 1990s by a Romanian ethnographer mention a forbidden valley patrolled by armed men during the Soviet period, but no one claims to have seen the interior. The ultimate purpose of the Carpathian site, or its connection to the Messerschmitt jet, has never been conclusively established. The destruction of original reconnaissance negatives and the enforced silence of winter flare personnel ensured that no complete public record exists. Today, only the oil-stained logbook, its final page torn mid-sentence, remains as evidence that something in those mountains drew the last desperate flight of a dying regime, and the attention of two superpowers unwilling to speak of what they found. In February 1952, the British Secret Intelligence Service received a fragmentary report from a Norwegian fishing trawler operating near Jan Mayen Island in the Norwegian Sea. The crew claimed to have sighted the conning tower of a German-type WWII U-boat adrift in rough seas. The vessel bore the number U-478, a designation missing from official Kriegsmarine records after May 1945. Naval historians had long assumed the submarine was sunk during the war, yet here it was, 7 years later, sighted more than 1,000 kilometers from any documented wartime patrol route. The Royal Navy dispatched HMS Serpent, a T-class submarine, to investigate. On March 17, 1952, Serpent made sonar contact with a large metallic object lying stationary at a depth of 82 meters. The outline matched that of a Type WWII. A follow-up mission, codenamed Operation Serpent's Wake, was initiated under the cover of a routine hydrographic survey. The task force included Royal Navy divers from the Special Boat Service, SBS, and a pair of civilian oceanographers with wartime Admiralty experience. Divers reached the wreck on March 23. The hull showed deliberate demolition charges around the ballast tanks, suggesting controlled scuttling. Oddly, there were no signs of combat damage. The forward torpedo tubes were empty, yet the stern tubes were loaded. The entry hatch was open, and the interior was in a state of eerie preservation. The ship's log ended abruptly on May 12, 1945, 4 days after Germany's surrender, with the final line breaking off mid-sentence. "We have received the signal." Proceeding to. Inside the captain's quarters, divers recovered a functioning Lorenz radio unit, still tuned to a frequency emitting faint, intermittent bursts of code. When decoded on board HMS Serpent, the message resolved into meaningless letter strings, possibly a cipher header awaiting a key. Strangely, the bursts repeated at irregular intervals, sometimes hours apart. The oceanographers noted that the signal originated not from the wreck, but from an unknown source further north. On March 25, a senior officer from the Admiralty's Department of Naval Intelligence arrived aboard Serpent with sealed orders. The U-boat was to be destroyed by depth charges. No salvage was to be attempted. Divers were ordered to place demolition charges in the control room and engine compartments. Within hours, U-478 was reduced to twisted wreckage scattered across the seabed. The decision baffled the SBS team. Petty Officer Michael Craven, one of the divers, privately told his brother years later that the order to scuttle came after a coded transmission was received aboard Serpent. Craven claimed the message was not in Royal Navy format, and that the officer who delivered it wore no visible rank or branch insignia. The origin of that transmission has never been clarified. No official photographs of the operation have surfaced. An internal Admiralty memo dated April 1952 refers obliquely to removal of anomalous equipment from U-478 wreck prior to demolition. The same memo notes that 2 steel containers, dimensions 1.2 meters by 0.6 meters, were transferred to an unmarked trawler and taken to Scapa Flow. Records of their arrival, if they exist, remain sealed. Attempts to reconstruct U-478's wartime history lead to dead ends. The U-boat is absent from Kriegsmarine commissioning logs, yet its construction number corresponds to a batch of submarines built at the Blohm & Voss shipyard in Hamburg in early 1944. Several of those hulls were reassigned under special operational status to the Abwehr, Germany's military intelligence service. Surviving Blohm & Voss workers interviewed in the 1970s recalled that some of these submarines were fitted with experimental communications gear and extra fuel storage for extended voyages. Norwegian Coast Guard archives contain a curious entry from May 18, 1945. A fishing vessel reported sighting a surfaced U-boat northeast of Bear Island, flying no flag, and crewed by men wearing dark uniforms without rank insignia. The sighting was dismissed at the time as a mistaken identification of a Soviet submarine. In 1998, a declassified SIS briefing for the Defense Committee mentioned Operation Serpent's wake only in passing, noting interdiction of hostile maritime platform, origin undetermined. The phrasing suggested the Admiralty may not have considered U-478 strictly a German asset. Some researchers believe it may have been operating under foreign command in the war's closing days. What, if anything, U-478 carried in its final mission remains speculative. The theory most often cited by naval historians is that the submarine transported uranium oxide for use in a last-ditch German nuclear project, similar to U-234's documented mission to Japan. Others point to the odd radioactivity and argue that its cargo may have been advanced communications technology, possibly not of German design, evacuated before Allied capture. The 2 steel containers removed before scuttling have never been accounted for. A handwritten note found among the personal papers of Vice Admiral Sir Geoffrey Oliver, dated March 1952, reads, "Containers secured. Destination remains undisclosed. No further mention in minutes." Oliver's family later confirmed the handwriting but had no knowledge of the container's fate. Today, the site where U-478 was destroyed lies within a Norwegian-controlled marine exclusion zone, ostensibly to protect wildlife. Civilian dives are prohibited. Sonar scans conducted by private research vessels in the early 2000s suggest the wreck has been further disturbed, possibly by undersea demolition, sometime in the late 20th century. The case remains one of the least discussed episodes in Royal Navy post-war history. Every official request for a full release of Serpent's wake records has been denied under national security exemptions. All that survives in the public record is the trawler captain's initial sighting, a handful of vague Admiralty memos, and the knowledge that a submarine long thought sunk reappeared briefly, only to be deliberately erased from the ocean floor, taking its secrets with it. On May 14, 1961, an unmarked Soviet freight convoy crossed the East German border from Poland under heavy guard. Its destination was the Wünsdorf military district, a sprawling command hub south of Berlin, long known as the headquarters of Soviet forces in Germany. Within the convoy's cargo manifests, later recovered from defunct Stasi transport files, appeared the designation Archivschatten, Shadow Archive, a sealed repository of confiscated wartime research taken from German scientists who had vanished in the chaotic years between 1945 and 1948. The origins of Archivschatten trace back to the immediate aftermath of the war, when Soviet counterintelligence units scoured occupied Germany for scientists and engineers tied to the Reich's secret weapons programs. While some, like those in Operation Osoaviakim, were officially transferred to the USSR, others were taken without record. Witnesses spoke of night raids in Dresden, Leipzig, and Jena, where men in civilian clothes, speaking Russian and German, would remove entire laboratory contents, packing files and apparatus into trucks before disappearing. Among the seized materials were blueprints for what documents described as a long-range electromagnetic pulse device, tested in the pine forests outside Wünsdorf in late 1944. Soviet documents described these as Feldversuch 14, Field Trial 14, involving a weapon intended to disable electrical systems over wide areas. The files also mention high-voltage capacitor banks, coil assemblies several meters in diameter, and repeated references to vector phase alignment. The scientists listed in the reports, Dr. Hermann K. Fels, Dr. Otto Schreiber, and engineer Lutz Varenholt, do not appear in any post-war employment rosters, East or West. In August 1961, NATO intelligence received satellite imagery suggesting unusual construction within the Wünsdorf forest perimeter. Analysts identified new rail spurs, multiple underground entrances, and a power substation far larger than the needs of a conventional command facility. This prompted a covert aerial reconnaissance mission by the U.S. Air Force, using a modified RB-57 Canberra fitted with long-range oblique cameras. The flight, code-named Silver Lantern, departed from RAF Gatto under cover of darkness. Silver Lantern was cut short. Two Soviet MiG-19 fighters intercepted the Canberra over East German airspace, forcing it to land at a Soviet-controlled airfield in Finsterwald. The crew, Captain John Hanley and Lieutenant William Ross, were detained for 48 hours, questioned, and released without charges. All their exposed film was confiscated. Upon their return to the UK, both officers were quietly reassigned to non-operational duties and retired within a year. Fragments of the confiscated imagery were later reconstructed from backup telemetry data. These revealed a partially camouflaged clearing containing what appeared to be large cylindrical structures on rail-mounted platforms, possibly mobile generators or pulse emitters. One image, though degraded, showed a tall lattice tower with radial antenna elements, a design inconsistent with standard communications masts of the era. Stasi files declassified after 1990 indicate that Archivschatten was stored in a reinforced underground vault beneath a former Wehrmacht command bunker in Wünsdorf. Access was limited to a handful of Soviet officers and select East German technical staff. The files themselves were stored in steel cabinets, each drawer marked only by a numeric code. Witness statements from former East German military engineers claim that some cabinets contained sealed lead boxes labeled Nerfer Hauptabteilung 13, a Stasi division specializing in counterintelligence and special materials. By the late 1970s, NATO surveillance of Wünsdorf recorded periodic high-voltage discharges, detectable via ELINT monitoring stations in West Berlin. These events, lasting only seconds, coincided with temporary power fluctuations in nearby East German towns. Publicly, the GDR explained these as substation faults or lightning strikes, though weather records from those dates do not support that claim. In early 1983, the Archivschatten site experienced a week-long lockdown. Soviet troops erected additional perimeter fencing, and all East German personnel were barred from entry. A declassified Bundesnachrichtendienst (BND) briefing from 1992 cites an anonymous GDR source who claimed a containment failure had occurred during testing of equipment originally seized in 1945. The source reported that the incident damaged several underground chambers and prompted the transfer of priority assets back to the USSR. When the Soviet military withdrew from Germany in 1994, the Wünsdorf facility was abandoned. German Federal Survey teams were denied access to certain underground areas by Russian liaison officers, who claimed the tunnels were structurally unsafe. In 2006, An urban exploration group managed to enter one of the outer bunkers. They found empty file cabinets, shredded paper debris, and a rusted steel container with Cyrillic hazard markings. Radiation levels were slightly elevated but not immediately dangerous. No verified inventory of Ark of Schatten has ever surfaced. The blueprints for the alleged pulse weapon, if they still exist, remain in Russian custody or destroyed. The fate of the scientists connected to the project is equally opaque. None were ever accounted for in post-war records, suggesting either relocation under assumed identities or termination. The combination of Soviet secrecy, Stasi compartmentalization, and the deliberate erasure of physical evidence has ensured that Ark of Schatten remains one of the least understood legacies of the technological plunder that followed the Second World War. Whether its files contained nothing more than over-engineered prototypes or something with operational capability is a question that the locked vaults of Wünsdorf, now silent and overgrown, refuse to answer. In March 1983, a small padded envelope arrived at the Paris offices of investigative journalist Étienne Morel. It contained 3 microfilm reels, unmarked except for faint penciled numbers, 5, 7, and 9, and a note written in halting French, from a friend in Moscow. Do not trust the dates. The reels, once examined, revealed partial translations of German military documents referencing Aktion Graufrost, an operation conducted by Wehrmacht units in the Caucasus during the winter of 1942. The translated fragments were inconsistent, pages missing, headings cut off, but certain details emerged. The operation was overseen by an ad hoc task group under Army Group A, commanded in the field by Oberstleutnant Hans Drexler. The stated objective was the extraction of mineral payloads from shafts in the WWII Tau region, an inhospitable zone near the Soviet-Georgian border. The documents made repeated references to foreign technical advisors, described only as specialists of non-German origin, operating under direct SS supervision. One set of field reports detailed heavy engineering equipment airlifted to a remote plateau by Ju-52 transport aircraft, using makeshift landing strips prepared by mountain troops of the Gebirgsjäger. The equipment included high-capacity generators, reinforced drilling rigs, and sealed lead containers, none of which appear in standard Wehrmacht logistics records. A note in Drexler's handwriting warns, extraction must be complete before thaw. Moscow is aware. Secrecy imperative. By January 1943, Soviet forces began reclaiming territory in the Caucasus. Yet Graufrost's operational reports continued for another month, implying that the task group remained in place after the general German withdrawal. The last surviving fragment is dated February 19, 1943, reading only, payload secured. Awaiting northern transit. Advisors will not remain. The microfilm reels Morel received were incomplete. Several sentences ended mid-word, as if the original documents had been abruptly cut. Frame numbering suggested that reels 1 to 4 and 6 to 8 were missing entirely. Forensic analysis of the film stock indicated Soviet manufacture in the early 1950s, not wartime Germany, raising questions about whether the documents were retyped or altered before filming. During the late Cold War, satellite imagery of the WWII Tau region, declassified in 2005, showed an unusual high-security zone established by the Soviet military. The perimeter, marked by fencing and guard towers, encompassed what appeared to be collapsed mine entrances and reinforced storage bunkers. Soviet engineering logs from 1964, obtained through a brief archival window in the Yeltsin era, refer cryptically to legacy shaft containment and deep structure sealing. The area remained under military control until at least 1988. In 1987, Morel arranged to meet a former KGB archivist in Vienna, using a secure hotel suite. The man, calling himself Anton, claimed that Aktion Graufrost was known inside the KGB as File 9D, part of a classified wartime dossier cataloging captured Axis projects of non-standard scientific scope. According to Anton, the mineral payload was neither gold nor uranium but something more reactive, more unstable. When pressed, he refused further detail, only adding, "It came from beneath the ice before there was war." A year later, Morel was found dead in his apartment from what police ruled a gas leak. The microfilm reels vanished from his office. Colleagues recalled that in the weeks before his death, he had been trying to locate the missing reels, believing they had surfaced in Eastern Europe. Following the dissolution of the Soviet Union, local villagers near the former restricted zone in Dykh Tau reported that Russian troops had removed large sealed containers under heavy guard in the early 1990s. One witness described the convoy as escorted by men who wore no insignia and spoke no Russian I knew. The containers were loaded onto flatbed trucks and driven north toward Mozdok Air Base, from which heavy transport aircraft regularly departed for destinations unknown. Today, the Graufrost site is accessible only to mountaineering expeditions, but its mine entrances remain collapsed and partially flooded. Geiger counter readings taken by a 2014 climbing team showed no abnormal radiation levels, though magnetic compasses behaved erratically in the vicinity of the largest shaft. The surviving microfilm fragments, now in the hands of a private collector, have been digitized but not released. Without the missing reels, the true purpose of Aktion Graufrost and the nature of the so-called mineral payload remains unresolved. Whether the operation was an ambitious resource extraction project, a cover for something far stranger, or a joint undertaking between the Third Reich and an unidentified foreign party is a question buried as deeply as whatever they pulled from the frozen rock of the Caucasus in 1943. The documents are gone, the witnesses silenced, the ground itself altered to erase the past. Yet the shadows remain, stretching from wartime bunkers to the quiet corridors of power today. Some doors, once opened, will not close without taking something from you. The question is not whether you can find these truths, but whether you can survive knowing them.